It strikes me there's this really strange thing happening right now, a kind of paradox. I mean, look where we are scientifically. We're mapping the cosmos, building AI. Reason seems like it should be king, right? And yet, everywhere you look, there's this huge pullback towards, well, the sacred. Rituals, ancient texts, gurus, this whole spiritual rebranding thing, it's massive.
It really is. And what's so fascinating, I think, is that this isn't some resurgence based on, new evidence for God or anything like that. It's not enlightenment finding new footing. This hunger for belief, whether it's packaged as traditional religion or some pricey wellness retreat, or even, frankly, very aggressive atheism, it seems to bubble up from somewhere else entirely. It seems to me people are driven to it by pain, not by proof.
Pain. How do you mean pain?
Yeah, pain or maybe chaos. Millions are searching for something to believe in, not because they've had some revelation, but because they need a container, something to hold the sheer messiness and maybe the terror of modern life. The old certainties are gone. Science gives us incredible power, but not much comfort. And the void. Well, it's pretty vast and scary for a lot of people.
Okay, let's definitely unpack that. Because the usual story we tell ourselves is much more comfortable, isn't it? We say we're evolving, finding personalized meaning, leaving rigid institutions behind to heal or find ourselves. Mindfulness, alignment, all that. But you're suggesting something much older is at play here. Something, well, frankly, a bit more disturbing about why we need these things.
Definitely. It's not really an evolution in my view. It's more like a return of the repressed. What's buried deep inside is finding new ways to surface. So look, our goal here isn't to judge whether one belief is better than another or if a text is true. What we really need to dig into in this deep dive is the structure of the psyche itself. The way our minds are built that seems to require these myths, these moral codes, this constant performance of trying to be pure or good. We need to look hard at what we're pushing down and why we feel this compulsion to label the resulting tension sacred or holy.
Right. And if we want to understand that psychic structure, especially in a group, in a culture, we have to start with a really fundamental, maybe uncomfortable truth. Civilization. It isn't primarily built on lofty ideals or enlightenment. At its core, it's built on an act of, well, violence, suppression.
Oh, that sounds extreme. You mean like laws and punishment?
Partly that, but deeper. It's built not on what we achieve, but on what we don't do, what we collectively agree to suppress. It's founded on renunciation.
Renunciation.
Yeah.
Saying no. A constant, powerful no. Think about it. To go from being just, raw, instinctive creatures to cooperative members of a society, we have to renounce so much. We have to say no to grabbing whatever we want right now. No to lashing out in rage instantly. No to acting on every flicker of lust, every impulse to dominate or destroy. Society demands we muzzle those things constantly.
So civilization is defined more by the fences we build around our instincts than by the cathedrals we build on top.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. The fences come first. Society provides the rules, the consequences. That's the iron fist of renunciation that keeps us in line. And religion, or these moral systems, the velvet gloves slipped over that fist. They are the incredibly sophisticated psychological tools that make us want to renounce those instincts, make us feel good, even righteous about saying no to ourselves. Religion turns the inner chaos, the mess of desires and guilt, into outer order. It helps us manage the debt we feel we owe the group for letting us belong.
Okay, that reframes religious practice entirely. Not as reaching for the divine, but as managing the internal chaos. A system. Can you break down how that management system actually works psychologically? How does it handle those raw instincts we're supposed to suppress?
Well, the key mechanisms aren't about elimination. You can't just delete a powerful instinct like desire or aggression. The mind doesn't work like that. It's all about displacement and transmutation.
Displacement, moving it somewhere else. Transmutation,
Right.
changing its form.
Precisely. Take something like intense ambition or maybe lust. Religion or these systems, they don't usually say, just stop wanting that, because honestly, that's impossible. Trying to just shut it down often leads to more problems, neurosis.
So what do they ask?
They ask you to transmute it, to change its form. Channel that raw energy, that intensity, into something else, into fervent prayer maybe, or obsessive devotion to a cause, or, crucially, by labeling the original instinct sin or temptation. Once it's labeled like that, the energy can be sort of contained, watched, confessed, managed. The power isn't destroyed. It's just rerouted towards a goal the system approves of, like achieving holiness or fighting the good fight against that very temptation.
Ah, I see. So the energy is still there, just flowing down a different path, like rewiring a circuit board.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
Or think about aggression, rage, Civilization obviously can't handle random violence.
Yeah.
So again, religion doesn't demand you stop feeling anger or hatred. That's probably impossible too. Instead, it redirects it. It gives you sanctioned targets: the heretic, the outsider, the unbeliever, the demon, the political enemy, whatever it is. It provides a holy war or a righteous struggle so that the death drive, Thanatos, has somewhere to go other than just chaos.
And what about the big one, the fear of death? That ultimate thing we repress.
Same mechanism. It's not about getting rid of the terror of oblivion. It's about decorating death, covering up the stark reality. Religion offers these elaborate, often beautiful stories: heaven, reincarnation, karma, cosmic justice, resurrection. It takes the unbearable fact of our end, our ultimate powerlessness, and reframes it as a spiritual promise, maybe even a reward. It's arguably the psyche's most brilliant and maybe most necessary deception. Hashtag 1.2 modern symptoms and sacred taboos.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, isn't it? Because if this is the underlying mechanism, we should see it playing out now, even in our supposedly secular age. And we do, don't we? The wellness influencer talking about sacred feminine energy for $100. The person meticulously burning sage to cleanse ancestral trauma. The teenager posting a tearful confession online, seeking public forgiveness. They'd all say they're free from old religion. They'd say it's self-help, healing, evolution. But you're saying it's just the old repression in new clothes. Why isn't it genuine growth?
Because the structure of control, the underlying psychological pattern, it's identical. The vocabulary changes. Maybe God becomes the universe or source or your highest self, but the game is the same. Take that modern confession you mentioned. Whether it's public on social media or private with a life coach or guru, what's the person seeking forgiveness for? Usually it's not for an actual crime. It's for being, well, human.
For having messy feelings, for being imperfect.
Exactly. For feeling rage at someone they love. For having a selfish thought, for desiring something wrong, or maybe just for not being happy enough, not manifesting enough.
Yeah.
They need absolution for the difficult, contradictory reality of their inner life.
And the system, church, guru, wellness trend, whatever, it grants that forgiveness. But there's a catch. There's always a catch.
The price is always the same, isn't it? You have to label your natural, messy human complexity as something negative that needs fixing. Call it sin, call it ego, call it negative energy, unhealed trauma, low vibrations, your shadow side. This is what I mean by the alchemy of repression. You take something inside you that feels unbearable, the shame, the desire, the anger, the doubt, and you make it holy or sacred in a negative way. You pathologize it, you call it shadow work or ancestral patterns. And by doing that, by externalizing it and giving it a special name, you make it feel like something you can control, manage, maybe even heal or transcend.
Making the unbearable holy so it can be controlled. That's a really crucial distinction.
It is. And look, historically, this structure is incredibly consistent. Think about the Puritans policing every pleasure, seeing the body as this battlefield. Or Victorian England, the repression of sexuality and grief was so intense it almost became eroticized. The fainting, the elaborate mourning rituals.
So how does that same policing work today without the overt religious framework?
Oh, it's definitely there. In wellness culture, for instance, you see moral exclusion, right? People talk about cutting out toxic people. It's like a modern form of excommunication, often done very publicly online. Your vibes, your energy, your alignment, these are judged with almost religious seriousness. If you get sick or you're depressed, there's often an underlying judgment. You weren't positive enough, you didn't do the work, you're not aligned. And self-care isn't just nice to have anymore, it's practically a moral duty. Failing to be optimally healthy and happy feels like a kind of moral failing.
The goal is still purity then, just a different kind.
The underlying psychological need defines the terms. The sacred is what you're not allowed to question, whether that's the literal word of God or the absolute necessity of positive thinking or the latest social justice doctrine. And the taboo is what you're not allowed to feel, whether that's blasphemous doubt or maybe just boredom or real anger or envy. It's the same prison cell, psychologically speaking. It's just been repainted, maybe minimalist white with some nice plants. Hashtag 1.3, the violent return. So what happens when this denial, this renunciation of instincts goes too far? When it's too strict, too severe? That's when we get what's called the return of the repressed. Because you can bury an instinct, push it down deep, but it doesn't actually die. It just festers, it gathers energy, and eventually it erupts. But not directly. It erupts as a symptom, often in a really distorted, displaced, sometimes quite violent way. The stronger the denial, the weirder and more forceful the symptom tends to be when it breaks through.
Right. So if you clamp down really hard on X, the pressure builds until it bursts out sideways as Y, but Y is just X wearing a mask, maybe a holy mask.
That's a perfect way to think about it. The psychic energy has to go somewhere. The system will fracture if it doesn't find some kind of outlet. And we can see this in so many cultural practices that look, on the surface, purely spiritual. But underneath, they're acting like psychological pressure valves.
Can you give a concrete example, something that really shows this displacement at work?
Okay, think about the intense Catholic focus on the physical suffering of Christ. The wounds, the stigmata, the graphic depictions of the Passion. From this psychological perspective, you could analyze that intense devotion as a powerful, complex sublimation of repressed masochism. The feeling of guilt, the sense fostered by a harsh superego that one deserves to suffer, that one is inherently bad, that internal pressure is unbearable, so it gets projected outward onto the figure of Christ. His suffering becomes sacred, divine. By focusing intensely on his wounds, the individual finds a sanctioned way to engage with, even venerate, their own repressed need to suffer, or their own feelings of guilt and self-punishment, all under the guise of piety.
Wow, okay. That's a challenging way to look at it. What about something different, like the prohibition of images in Islam or some forms of Protestantism?
That's often interpreted as a displacement of the terror of desire, particularly visual or erotic desire. The idea is if you forbid the image, the representation of the desired object, the beautiful, the tempting, the distracting maybe, you can gain control over the raw, biological wanting itself. The energy of that desire isn't eliminated, of course. It might get redirected into intense intellectual focus on the theology of the prohibition itself, or into strict adherence to the rules. The focus shifts from the object to the rule about the object.
Making sense. And the Protestant work ethic, that relentless drive to produce, achieve, save.
A classic example of the moralization of repressed sexuality. If pleasure, particularly bodily pleasure, is deeply suspect or outright forbidden, then the intense energy associated with Eros has to be channeled somewhere acceptable. Where does it go? Into work, production, achievement, thrift, moral seriousness, building wealth. The passion that might have gone towards the body gets poured into the business, the bank account, the reputation for diligence. It gets sanctified as virtue.
And you mentioned the Hindu caste system earlier. How does that fit into this idea of managing repressed feelings like guilt or aggression?
Well, looking at it through this lens, a rigid social hierarchy like the caste system can be seen as a massive society-wide mechanism to externalize guilt and shame. For the purer members of the upper caste to maintain their sense of righteousness and purity, the system requires a group designated as inherently impure, untouchable. The existence of this external impurity allows the internal feelings of potential contamination or guilt within the dominant group to be projected outwards and contained. The aggression involved in creating and maintaining such divisions, the judgment, the separation, it gets sublimated, it's built into the very structure of society, legitimized by religious narratives, freezing that judgment into a kind of social law. It manages the internal psychic tensions of the group by creating external divisions.
Okay, so if we're seeing these ancient mechanisms repackaged today, we need to go deeper, right? To the very root. Where does this fundamental need for moral codes, for guilt, even come from? You argue it traces back to a kind of foundational crime, a primal event.
We have to, yes. To understand the blueprint, the deep psychic inheritance. The idea stemming from Freud's work is the concept of the primal horde. Picture a very early human group dominated by a powerful, tyrannical father figure. He has all the resources, the power, absolute control, maybe even exclusive access to the women. He rules by sheer force and jealousy. The sons, meanwhile, are resentful, envious. They fear him, but they also desire what he has, his power, his freedom, his women. They live in his shadow, excluded.
That sounds like a situation ripe for explosion.
It's almost inevitable, isn't it? So the theory goes, the sons eventually band together, united by their shared resentment. They find the courage to rise up. They overthrow the father. They kill him. And then, in a really symbolic, almost ritualistic act, they devour him. To internalize his strength, perhaps, to make his power their own. Now, you'd think, great, liberation, freedom, they got what they wanted.
You're saying the result wasn't freedom, it was overwhelming guilt.
Immediate, crushing, profound guilt. Think about it. The shared enemy that united them is gone. Now suddenly, they're all rivals. Who gets the spoils? Who takes charge? More deeply, they realize, unconsciously, that they haven't just killed a tyrant. They've killed the very principle of authority itself. They've unleashed chaos, and they're terrified of each other and of what they've done.
So the guilt wasn't just remorse, it was fear. fear of the chaos they created.
Exactly. And the immediate psychological reaction is to slam the brakes on, to impose limits where the father's brute force used to be. This primal crime, this foundational murder is so terrifying that it has to be immediately managed, ritualized, sacralized, ultimately repressed. But the guilt remains. That guilt, born from the memory of that first murder, creates the first great taboos. Don't kill, especially within the group, the brothers. And don't desire the forbidden, the women associated with the father, leading to the incest taboo. These rules are desperately needed to hold the fragile new order together.
The murder that founds morality. It's a stunning paradox. So the symbolic replacement, killing the actual father, but immediately setting up a symbolic father, like God or law, that was essential.
Absolutely essential for survival. You kill the real, tyrannical father, but you immediately erect a symbolic one, a totem animal, a god, a sacred law, the abstract concept of authority, something to represent the necessary limits. And religion, in this view, becomes the ongoing, unconscious reenactment of that crime and its aftermath. It's a way of processing that primal guilt, disguised as worship, sacrifice, and obedience to the symbolic father. And what gets passed down through generations isn't just the story, but the feeling. This deep, persistent, existential guilt. The feeling of being somehow inherently flawed, of owing a debt just for being alive, for desiring, for surviving. It's the guilt of the survivor, the guilt of having impulses, the guilt of being separate. Hashtag 2.2, Eros, Thanatos, and sublimation. Right. Within the inherited structure, driven by that guilt, we see the two fundamental forces, the great warring drives within us, find their expression and their management. We talk about Eros and Thanatos. Eros, the life drive. That's the push towards connection, binding together, building, creating, loving, merging. It's the force that holds families, communities, even cells together. The drive to live, to continue.
And its opposite, Thanatos, the death drive. That one's harder for people to get their heads around, isn't it? It sounds so dark. It's not just wanting to literally die, is it?
No, not usually so literally. Thanatos is more like the drive towards dissolution, towards peace through stillness, towards ending tension. It's the pullback toward an inorganic state, towards entropy. We see it in aggression, destruction, rage, the urge to tear down, to separate, but also maybe in things like the desire for oblivion, extreme withdrawal, the relentless pursuit of self-sabotage, or even that rigid, controlling impulse to shut down all spontaneity and risk. It's the underlying pull towards inertia, towards the end of struggle.
And clearly, society can't just let either of these loose, can it? Raw Eros is chaotic, maybe incestuous. Raw Thanatos is murderous anarchy.
Precisely. Civilization demands they be tamed. And religion, or these strong moral systems, they don't just tame them, they demand we worship the taming process. So Eros gets channeled into acceptable forms like state-sanctioned marriage, sacred union, while other expressions are labeled sin or perversion. Thanatos gets redirected outwards into holy war, righteous anger against enemies, or inwards as self-punishment and asceticism. The system gives us a divine lawgiver, so we don't have to face our rage at earthly parents or bosses. It gives us hell, so we can feel vindicated in our desire to punish those who harm us. The aggression is managed, sanctified, given a proper outlet.
Okay, but this channeling, this redirecting, this is sublimation, right? The artist turning personal pain into a masterpiece. The scientist pouring obsessive energy into discovery. The activist fighting for justice. Surely that has to be seen as something positive, a sign of real human creativity and growth, not just managed neurosis.
This is where we need to be really careful, really precise. Yes, sublimation is without doubt one of civilization's greatest tricks. It's how we get art, science, culture. It turns private turmoil into public good, personal obsession into collective progress.
Yeah.
It absolutely works.
I sense a but coming.
But it always comes at a price. Sublimation is creation, yes, but it's creation fueled by sacrifice. The sacrifice of authenticity, maybe? The sacrifice of wholeness? To sublimate, you have to take the raw energy of an instinct. You can't directly express maybe aggression, maybe desire, and you have to cut it off from its original source, shape it, polish it, and direct it towards a goal that culture approves of. You gain the beautiful symphony or the scientific breakthrough, but you might lose touch with the raw, messy, vital source of that energy within yourself. You trade some essential part of your untamed aliveness for social function, for creative output, wholeness for acceptability.
So even the highest achievements, they're still fundamentally shaped by this internal conflict management. By repression?
They're often magnificent symptoms of that conflict, yes. Look at the lives of saints, for instance, viewed psychologically. St. Augustine, consumed by what he described as lust, redirects that incredible intensity into theological argument, into ecstatic visions of divine love. The energy is the same, the object is sublimated. Or Teresa of Avila, her accounts of mystical union are just dripping with intense, physical, almost erotic imagery. The spear, the divine wounding, the ecstatic pain. It reads like powerful, forbidden desire translated into the only acceptable language available to her, the language of divine encounter. The mind finds a way to experience the forbidden by calling it holy.
And in secular life today.
It's everywhere. The workaholic executive driving themselves relentlessly, is that pure ambition? Or is it sublimated rage, or a desperate need for control stemming from childhood helplessness? The fierce political activist pouring all their energy into a cause. Is it purely about justice, or is it also channeling personal anger or trauma against a safe external target, the system? We are constantly taking the feelings we can't bear, the impulses we can't act on directly, and we're transforming them into work, into art, into ideology, into relationships, into something manageable, something we can perform or display. Hashtag 2.3, the voice of the jailer. And the mechanism inside us that enforces all this, that manages the guilt, drives the sublimation, keeps us in line. That's the superego. And this is maybe one of the toughest parts of the theory to really grapple with, because we tend to think of our conscience, our inner moral voice, as well as us, as wise, as good. But the superego in this framework isn't your wise inner guide. It's the internalized voice of external authority, parents, teachers, culture, law. And its primary mode isn't guidance, it's judgment. It's often quite cruel. It's the inner jailer.
How is it different from just having a conscience? My conscience stops me from shoplifting, for example. That seems straightforward.
A healthy conscience might operate from empathy. How would the shop owner feel, or what are the real consequences? The superego, however, often operates more rigidly, more absolutely. It's based on the internalized rules and the fear associated with breaking them. It doesn't negotiate, it condemns. Its goal isn't necessarily to make you better. Its goal is obedience, and its weapon is guilt and shame. It's the echo of the punishing authority figure long after they're gone, whispering that you're fundamentally flawed.
What does it typically whisper? What are its lines?
Oh, it's usually not very encouraging. It's the voice that says, you are never good enough, or you deserve that failure. It's proof of your inadequacy. Or maybe you must sacrifice your own desires, your own happiness for the sake of the rule, the duty, the expectation. It demands constant vigilance, constant self-monitoring, constant performance. And the threat is always lurking, the threat of rejection, of failure, of being cast out. And what does powerful religion or intense secular ideology do? It takes this inner critic, this internalized voice of your specific upbringing and culture, and it elevates it. It gives the jailer a crown, a divine mandate. It turns your personal shame into cosmic sin. It transforms your self-doubt into evidence of your failure to adhere to the sacred principle, whatever that might be.
Ah, okay. That explains why religious guilt, or that intense guilt you sometimes see in very committed political or social movements, feels so absolute, so non-negotiable and crushing.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because it gets wired into something much deeper than just breaking a rule. It taps back into that primal fear, that primal guilt from the original crime. To disobey the superego, once it's been crowned by ideology or religion, feels like betraying the fundamental pact that holds society together. It feels like risking annihilation, being cast back into that terrifying original chaos. So we obey, we confess, we perform the rituals of purity, not always out of genuine belief, but out of a deep, unconscious terror of what might happen if we stop. The superego demands constant sacrifice, the sacrifice of instinct, pleasure, wholeness, just to feel safe, just to belong.
Okay, but here's the big question then. If this whole structure, the guilt, the superego, is so tied up with those old symbols, God, church, sin, if we get rid of them, if we consciously embrace reason, science, secularism, surely then we break free. Surely that's liberation from the guilt machine.
That's the hope, isn't it? The great promise of the Enlightenment, maybe. But from this perspective, it's largely a delusion, a very seductive one. The psychological structure, the need for the container, the mechanism of repression, and the superego, and it doesn't just vanish when you tear down the church. It's far more ancient, far more adaptable than any specific religion. It just mutates. It finds new hosts, new symbols, new dogmas, new altars to kneel at. You haven't escaped the prison, you've just changed cells. Maybe the new cell has nicer furniture, seems more rational, but the locks are often just as strong.
Wait, hold on. That feels overly cynical, maybe. If I choose reason, if I demand evidence, if I actively critique dogma, how is that not freedom? Are you really saying being a rational atheist is just another kind of religion?
When reason itself becomes a kind of unforgiving God, when scientific consensus becomes unquestionable dogma, when critical thinking leads to rigid ideological purity tests, then yes, the form changes, but the underlying psychological function can be remarkably similar. Look closely at the militant atheist, for example. Often you see reason or science elevated to the status of an absolute jealous deity. There's an intense policing of thought, Wrong ideas aren't just incorrect, they're harmful, problematic, almost sinful. Blasphemy against scientific orthodoxy is met with outrage.
The patterns, they do sound familiar.
They are. Confession of ideological error replaces confession of sin. Think of public apologies, ritual denunciations. Excommunication happens through cancellation or social ostracism. Questioning the established rational consensus on certain issues becomes heresy. The deep need for certainty, for purity, intellectual or moral, the fear of contamination by bad ideas, the urge to cast out the doubter, it's all there. The superego is running the show, just using a different vocabulary list. It speaks in logic and evidence, but the underlying command is often still, obey the orthodoxy or be condemned. It's repression translated into the language of rationality. Hashtag 3.2 theology without God. And we see other powerful mutations too, dominating the cultural landscape right now. Think about the really fervent secular moralists. They often treat concepts like human rights or social justice or historical progress, not as hard-won human agreements, but as if they were sacred texts handed down from on high. Unquestionable, divinely ordained almost. Belief in the cause becomes absolute.
And how does the guilt mechanism work there, without sin?
Oh, the guilt is potent. It often revolves around inherited wounds, historical blame. Trauma can function like original sin, something inescapable, defining, requiring constant acknowledgement and atonement. Your moral worth gets measured by your demonstrated awareness, your willingness to confess your privilege, your complicity in systems of oppression, your dedication to doing the work. This constant performance of awareness, this vigilant self-monitoring, it replaces the old pressure to be constantly pious or God-fearing.
So the specific commandments change, thou shalt acknowledge thy privilege instead of thou shalt not covet. But the feeling of being judged, the need to constantly prove your worthiness, that stays.
That trembling before the ideal remains exactly the same. It's an exhausting, demanding system. And the judgment can be just as swift and merciless. The inquisition might be online, driven by algorithms and social pressure. But the shame, the fear of exclusion, the demand for purity of thought and action, it's structurally identical to older religious forms. It is essentially theology without God. The fervor is religious, even if the object of worship is a secular ideal.
And the other big one, the spiritual but not religious crowd. They seem so focused on personal well-being, positivity, autonomy. Surely they've escaped the old structures.
Have they? Or have they just given the repression a very aesthetically pleasing makeover? Think about it. There's often an intense avoidance of negative energy, almost like avoiding demonic influence. Sadness, anger, conflict are pathologized as low vibrations or blockages. Self-love becomes a kind of sacrament, demanding constant practice, often involving specific rituals or purchases. Radical acceptance is preached, but often conditional on achieving a certain state of healing.
But if the focus is on healing and self-love, how is that repressive?
Because the underlying belief, often unstated, is still fundamentally conditional. It's, if I just become pure enough, positive enough, healed enough, aligned enough, then I will finally be safe, worthy, loved, chosen. It replaces God's plan with, the universe has my back, or manifesting my desires. The superego is still there, but now it demands the repression of anything deemed negative or unhealed. It demands the constant performance of spiritual wellness, positivity, and growth. The cage is still a cage, even if it's gilded with mindfulness and the chains are scented with organic sage. The jailer doesn't threaten hellfire anymore. It threatens bad vibes or getting out of alignment. Hashtag 3.3 repression is antibiotic.
This is pretty bleak, isn't it? If the structure just keeps mutating, finding new symbols, new ways to enforce purity and manage guilt, can we ever actually be free? Is there any escape from this cycle?
Well, maybe the first step towards any kind of freedom is to understand the final, really difficult insight, which is, we haven't managed to kill repression because fundamentally it's not just an enemy, it's also a function, a vital one. Think of it like a psychic immune system. It developed for a reason. It protects the fragile conscious self.
Protects us from what? What's so dangerous that we need this elaborate defense system?
It protects us ultimately from the unbearable truth. The truth that maybe drove us to invent God, law, and all the subsequent moral frameworks in the first place. The truth of, well, cosmic indifference. The possibility that there's no inherent meaning, no divine plan behind our suffering, no ultimate justice waiting, no guarantee of safety or love, no cosmic parent watching over us, no tribe that won't eventually let us down or betray us. Just existence, raw, unmediated, terrifyingly open-ended.
The sheer vulnerability, the aloneness.
Exactly. Humans seem to be meaning-making creatures dropped into a potentially meaningless universe. We crave certainty, connection, purpose. and the stark reality of contingency, chaos, and our own mortality. It's often too much to bear directly. We didn't invent God just to explain thunderstorms. We invented God and the law and the superego to survive ourselves, to put a container around the overwhelming chaos of our own instincts, the rage, the desire, the fear, the loneliness, to make the unbearable bearable.
So repression isn't just the disease, it's also, in a way, the cure. Or like an antibiotic.
Precisely. It's the antibiotic we developed to survive the infection of raw existence. And what happens when you stop taking your antibiotics too soon?
The fever comes back, sometimes worse.
And you see that fever everywhere today, don't you? As the old structures weaken, the raw stuff, the anxiety, the rage, the existential dread comes flooding back. We see soaring rates of anxiety, depression, addiction. We see society fragmenting, rage spilling over. We take away God and the hole gets frantically filled with other things. Obsessive concerns about mental health as a moral category, rigid political identities that demand total loyalty, the endless quest for self-optimization, conspiracy theories that offer hidden meaning. We're still desperately searching for that container, for certainty, for rules. We still kneel. We've just swapped the prie-dieu for the yoga mat, the therapist's couch, the political rally, or the comment section. The need persists because the chaos it defends against is still there.
So it feels like we're at a crossroads then, individually, culturally. Do we keep building new altars, maybe shinier, more rational-looking ones? Do we write ever more elaborate secular commandments, chase ever purer vibes? Or is there another way? Can we dare to just stop? Stop translating everything, stop performing, stop trying to make our messy human experience fit into some neat, sacred, or therapeutic box?
If there's another path, a path towards something resembling authentic freedom from the cage, maybe it lies in what we could call desecration, not in a destructive sense, but in a sense of stripping away the false holiness, returning things to their raw state, recognizing that your desire is just desire, not divine inspiration or sinful temptation. Your rage is just rage, not righteous anger or toxic negativity. Your grief is just grief, not a spiritual lesson or a chemical imbalance to be medicated away. It means taking back the power we project onto gods, gurus, systems, the universe. Stop outsourcing our conscience, our guilt, or responsibility to external authorities.
Stop begging the sky for forgiveness, as you said earlier.
Exactly. Yeah. Because the only real forgiveness comes from within, from accepting the whole messy, contradictory reality of what it means to be human. It means facing the silence where the divine voice used to be, accepting responsibility for the wild, difficult, beautiful thing that you are. And that leaves us and leaves you listening with some stark, maybe terrifying questions, doesn't it? If you really dismantle the altar in your mind, who or what do you kneel to then? Where does your ultimate loyalty lie, if not with an external code or deity? If you manage to silence that inner critic, that cruel superego that echoes cultural judgment, who tells you what's right? Who sets your boundaries? How do you manage your own potential for harm, your own aggression, without that internal policeman?
And maybe the hardest one. If you stop calling your pain sacred, if you accept that suffering might just be suffering, meaningless suffering, not part of some grand plan or a catalyst for growth, can you still bear it? Can you still find the will to live, to love, to create, knowing there might be no ultimate reward, no cosmic significance, no final judgment?
Because maybe real freedom isn't finding the right God or the right system. Maybe freedom is in the absence of structure. Maybe freedom is the presence of responsibility. The terrifying, exhilarating, crushing burden of choosing, acting, and feeling without divine permission, without a guaranteed safety net, without a pre-written script. You think you've moved beyond religion. Maybe. But religion was never really about God, was it? It was always about the wound, the deep human wound of existence, the need for meaning, the terror of chaos. So the final question, the one to sit with in the silence after this, is perhaps this. What are you repressing right now? What difficult truth, what uncomfortable feeling, what raw instinct are you pushing down? And what fashionable, acceptable, maybe even spiritual or rational name are you calling it to make it feel holy?